Hello and welcome to the YouTuber box for summer 2022. My name's Sam and it is a pleasure to have you here. Today we're going to be making ginger Szechuan. This box is fantastic. Now in this box we have a blend of 6 different spices that are designed to make the perfect summer sipper. Now this mead is going to be semi-sweet, but as you drink it, the Szechuan berries that are included in the spice mix create a progressively drier finish, which leaves a really tongue-tingling sensation, which I think is completely unique. So let's get into it, shall we? First thing we need to do before we do anything is sanitize our work surface and our equipment. Let's start with our work surface. To make our sanitizer, follow the included instructions on your sanitizing bottle. Now make sure you keep your sanitizer in a separate bucket, or you can keep some in a spray bottle, which is very handy for spraying surfaces. Now your sanitizer will last anywhere for around 3 to 4 weeks, which will be more than enough time to get to the aging process of this mead. So let's wipe down our surfaces and I'll show you what equipment we need to make this mead. Now something worth noting is that just because we've sprayed sanitizer doesn't mean the surface or the equipment is sanitized. The diluted sanitizer needs to sit on the work surface or equipment for at least 1 minute, and you don't need to rinse it because rinsing will just risk recontamination. Now for the bucket that's going to hold our mead, we want it to be slightly larger than the amount of mead we're creating. So for our 1 gallon kits, we're going to need a 2 gallon bucket, and for our 5 gallon kits, you're going to need a 6 gallon bucket. Follow whatever the recipe letter says. We need some of that headspace to ensure that the mead doesn't overflow and cause a mess, because it does get a bit foamy. The bucket that you're going to be fermenting in needs an airtight lid with a hole and a grommet for an airlock, and an airlock for the bucket lid. Now this is an S-type airlock. You can get 3-piece airlocks. They all do the same thing. It doesn't matter which one you go for. We're also going to need a stainless steel spoon, which we're going to be using to mix our ingredients together, a hydrometer and a testing cylinder so that we can get our gravity readings. I'll be explaining what those are in a bit. And either a wine thief or a turkey baster so that we can collect our sample for our gravity reading. A microwave safe measuring jug, a probe thermometer, and that's everything we need. Let's get started. So we need to sanitize all of our equipment, but we need to firstly clean it if it's not already. So if there's any signs of mold or bacteria, or even just a few dirt marks on the inside from the last batch of mead that you made, or if you bought this secondhand, make sure to give it a really good rinse with soapy, warm water. You want all of the visible dirt to be gone because our sanitizer is just there to kill all of the microbes and non-visible debris. So we're going to pour this into our fermenting bucket. And then just quite simply add all of our equipment, making sure that everything is fully immersed in the sanitizer and left for at least 1 minute. It's really important you make sure the inside of the lid is sanitized, and you can do that just by taking your turkey baster and adding a little bit of sanitizer on the top and then just leaving it to sit there so it's in contact. Great, it's now been a minute, so I'm going to make sure that all the sanitizer is back in the bucket, and I'm just going to re-pour that back into the sanitizer bucket for storage. Now the last thing we need to sanitize before we get started is our hands, so you can just place it in the bucket and leave it for 1 minute. Now it's worth noting, if you've got any open wounds on your hand, you don't want to do this because it's really going to sting. Instead, you can add some gloves and sanitize those if that's more convenient to you. It's now time for us to add our honey to our sanitized bucket. Now, if you have one of our kits that include honey, we correctly dose it for you so you can add the whole amount. It's really important that you make sure you get all of the sugar out of this, all of the honey. All of our containers are sanitized before they're sent to you, so you can add a little bit of extra water and give it a shake to make sure that you get everything out of it. So let's add our honey to the bucket. Now, if your honey arrives super set, what you can do is place the containers in some warm water and leave it to soak for a while, and that will help soften the honey up, making it a bit easier to get out of the container and also to mix together with our water. Now all of our honey's in the bucket, we're going to add sachet A, which is our nutrient blend. This helps keep our yeast happy and healthy and allows us to create really high ABV ferments in really short amounts of time. Make sure you get all that out. Then, using our sanitized microwave safe jug, we want to measure out half of the total volume of the mead that we're making. For 1 gallon, you want to measure out 2.5 quarts, and for 5 gallons, you want to measure out 2.5 gallons. So I'm going to be adding 2.5 liters here. Then, using our sanitized spoon, we're going to mix this all together until all of the honey is dissolved. Now it's really important that this happens, otherwise you're not going to get an accurate gravity reading. Now this process of mixing the honey, water and yeast nutrients together also imbues the mixture with oxygen, which is key for yeast health, because yeast, much like most other life forms, require oxygen. Only at the start of fermentation though. Now it's really important when you're mixing together that you don't scratch the sides of the bucket with your spoon, because scratches allows bacteria to accumulate in the cracks and can mean that you have to throw the bucket away. Now that all this is mixed together, we're going to top off to just below the recipe limit. So for instance, this is a 5 litre recipe kit, so I'm just going to top up just under 5 litres total. Great. Now we want to take our mesh bag and sanitize it fully by immersing it as we did with all of our other equipment. Now this is sanitized, we're going to add sachet B, which is our spice mix, to the mesh bag and seal it with a tight knot. Great, that's our must all ready to go. We can now put the lid on and the airlock whilst we rehydrate our yeast. To rehydrate our yeast, you want to add the amount of water that is stated under the yeast preparation section of your recipe letter. Now with our water added, we want to heat this to 101 degrees Fahrenheit or 38 degrees Celsius. A microwave works best for this. You can heat in 30 and 45 second blasts and give it a mix in between. We then want to sanitize our thermometer. We then want to use our sanitized thermometer to measure the temperature. Now it's really important we don't go above 38C or 101F, otherwise it will kill the yeast. So I'm going to go heat this up and I'll be back. Now one tip for when you're checking temperature of water, make sure you're not touching the glass of the container, as that will give you a wildly varied result from maybe what the actual temperature is. Now that our water's at the correct temperature, we want to go ahead and add sachet C, which is our gopher. This is going to help rehydrate our yeast. The process of dehydrating yeast folds up the yeast cells, which means they need a little bit of help to unfurl properly so that we have a healthy, fast fermentation. We now want to mix this together to make sure that all of the gopher is incorporated into the solution. And then we want to take our yeast and sprinkle it on top. We're now going to leave this to sit for 5 minutes. You'll now see that after 5 minutes, all of the yeast that were visible are now pretty much gone because they've dropped to the bottom of the solution and are beginning to rehydrate. We're now going to give this a really vigorous mix just to help that along. And then quite simply, we just pitch our yeast by pouring it directly into the solution. We can now give it one final stir, just to make sure that everything is all homogenized together. We're now going to take our gravity reading. Now this first gravity reading isn't too important, providing that you've added the exact amount of honey required for the recipe and you've created the mixture to the exact level that it needs to be for your recipe kit. We have already calculated the gravity for you and it will be 1.120. Now I'm going to take my gravity reading here, so we're just going to use our sanitized wine thief and add it straight to our cylinder. Now you can see here, for instance, that my hydrometer reading is 1.100, which is 20 gravity below what we want. Now I'm not too worried because I know that when we first mix our honey together, even if we dissolve it all, this concentration of sugars could be all over the place depending on where you grab it from. So I'm not too worried about that. Now, if you've never used a hydrometer before or don't know how to do gravity readings, I will leave a link in the description to our article on how to read hydrometers because it's quite in depth and it will be able to explain it far better than I can. So we use these hydrometers to track fermentation, and you want to take a hydrometer reading every 2 or 3 days. You'll see it drop very quickly in the beginning and it might slow down towards the end. That's completely normal. What you can do with your samples once you finish taking them is you can just gently pour them back into your bucket, or you could pour some of it back into the bucket and have the rest as a little reward. I'm not going to judge. I'm going to add one of my labels here just so that I know what's in the bucket, and our lid on top. This is where I leave you. This will ferment in around 10 to 14 days to 1.020. You can then rack it and follow the instructions in the next video, which Adam will talk to you about stabilizing and bottling. Thanks for choosing You to Brew for your mead needs, and I'll see you in the next video.